"Excuse me, you're in my seat," Emily Walker said calmly, showing her first-class boarding pass. The middle-aged white man smirked, crossed his legs to block her, and sneered,
Kid,
"Kid,
children don't belong here.
children don't belong
Get
here.
down to economy where you
Get
belong.
down to economy where you belong." Laughter and whispers rippled through the cabin as passengers leaned in, curious, some smirking, others pretending not to notice. A flight attendant arrived, barely glancing at Emily's ticket before siding with the man, ordering her to move. Heat flushed across her face, not only from humiliation but from the raw anger of being dismissed just because she was young. Every eye burned into her, waiting to see if she would break, waiting to see the little girl retreat in silence. What no one, not the sneering passenger, not the crew, not the gawking crowd, realized was that Emily was no ordinary teenager, and one call could ground them all. Don't just watch, act. When you see someone judged unfairly, will you stay silent or speak up? Subscribe if you believe talent has no color. Your voice changes everything. A middle-aged white man in an expensive suit was sitting in 2A, her seat. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his Rolex caught the cabin light as he typed furiously on his laptop. Emily paused, double-checking her boarding pass. The seat number was clear, 2A. "Excuse me," Emily said politely, holding up her boarding pass. "I think you might be in my seat." The man, Richard Blackwell, according to the name on his briefcase, looked up with barely concealed annoyance. His eyes swept over Emily dismissively, taking in her casual attire and young face. "I don't think so, sweetheart. This is definitely my seat. Maybe you should check with the flight attendant about getting to your correct section." His tone dripped with condescension, the kind that immediately made Emily's stomach clench. She'd heard it before, the assumption that she didn't belong, that her presence in first class was somehow a mistake. Flight attendant Jennifer Williams appeared at Emily's shoulder, her smile bright, but her eyes already showing signs of impatience. "Is there a problem here?" "This young lady seems confused about her seating assignment," Richard said before Emily could speak. He didn't even look up from his laptop screen. "I've been flying this route for 15 years. I always book 2A. Jennifer's gaze shifted between Richard's confident demeanor and Emily's youth. The math seemed simple to her. "Miss, may I see your boarding pass?" Emily handed it over, maintaining her composure despite the growing knot in her chest. She watched Jennifer's expression carefully. There was something in the woman's eyes, a flash of suspicion that had nothing to do with seating arrangements and everything to do with assumptions. "This does say 2A, Jennifer admitted reluctantly. "But there might have been a system error. Mr. Blackwell is one of our platinum members. Let me just verify this with the gate agent." Emily felt the familiar sting of bias wrapped in bureaucracy. "I'd appreciate that. And I'd like to speak with your supervisor about this process." Richard finally looked directly at Emily, his expression shifting from annoyed to mildly amused. "Look, kid, why don't you just take whatever seat they give you in coach? This is clearly above your pay grade." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Emily felt every eye in first class turn toward them. The weight of judgment, of assumption, of centuries of systemic bias pressed down on her shoulders. But she'd learned long ago that her response in moments like these would define not just the outcome, but who she was as a person. She pulled out her phone and quietly began recording. Jennifer returned with Marcus Brown, the head flight attendant, whose expression suggested he'd already made up his mind about the situation. His eyes barely registered Emily before focusing entirely on Richard. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm so sorry for this confusion," Marcus said smoothly. "We'll get this sorted out immediately." "I appreciate that, Marcus," Richard replied, using the man's name like he owned it. "I don't know how this young lady got hold of a first-class ticket, but there's obviously been some kind of mistake." Emily felt her jaw tighten. "There's no mistake. I purchased this ticket legally, and I have every right to this seat. Marcus finally turned to Emily, his professional smile not quite reaching his eyes. Miss, I'm going to need to see some additional identification, and I'll need to verify your payment method for this ticket. Additional identification? Emily's voice remained steady, but inside, alarm bells were ringing. I've already shown my boarding pass and ID. What additional verification do you need? Well, Marcus glanced meaningfully at Richard. Given the price point of first-class tickets and your apparent age, we just need to ensure everything is legitimate. The euphemisms were paper-thin. Emily understood exactly what was happening, and so did the other passengers who were now openly watching the confrontation. She noticed an elderly black woman in 3C shaking her head in disgust, and a young white couple whispering and pointing. I see, Emily said quietly. And do you require this additional verification from all your passengers, or just the ones who don't look like they belong here? Richard scoffed. Oh, please. Don't make this about race. This is about a kid trying to scam her way into first class. Mr. Blackwell makes a valid point, Marcus said, his bias now completely unveiled. We've seen this kind of thing before. Fraudulent tickets, stolen credit cards. We have to protect our other passengers. Emily's mind raced. This wasn't random discrimination. It felt orchestrated, practiced. She thought about her upcoming meeting, about the investors waiting for her presentation. Last week, TechCore Corporation had publicly questioned the legitimacy of young entrepreneurs in tech. Their CEO had specifically mentioned unqualified leaders getting undeserved attention. Was this connected somehow? She texted her assistant Sarah. Need legal counsel. Being discriminated against on AA Flight 2847. May miss investor meeting. Check if TechCore is involved. Start recording everything. I'll provide whatever documentation you require, Emily said aloud. But I'm also filing a formal complaint about this discriminatory treatment. Marcus's expression hardened. Miss, if you continue to be disruptive, we'll have to ask you to deplane. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Emily realized she was standing at a crossroads that would define everything that came next. Captain David Harrison emerged from the cockpit, his presence immediately commanding attention from every passenger in first class. His stern expression and the 3 stripes on his uniform sleeve left no doubt about his authority. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, directing his question to Marcus while barely acknowledging Emily's existence. Captain, we have a passenger who may be traveling on fraudulent documentation, Marcus explained. She's refusing to provide adequate verification and becoming belligerent when we try to resolve the situation. Emily felt her world tilt. The word fraudulent seemed to echo through the cabin. She could hear passengers beginning to murmur, could feel their eyes boring into her. This wasn't just discrimination anymore, this was character assassination. That's completely false, Emily said firmly. I've provided my boarding pass and identification. They're demanding additional verification solely because of my race and age. Richard looked up from his laptop with theatrical concern. Captain, I hate to say this, but I've been watching this whole thing. This young woman has been increasingly aggressive. I'm honestly starting to worry about the safety of this flight. The accusation hit Emily like a physical blow. Around her, she could hear passengers expressing concern, their voices growing louder. Someone behind her whispered, "Maybe we should just get off this plane." Another voice added, "I knew something was wrong when I saw her get on." Captain Harrison's expression grew even more serious. Miss, I'm going to need you to come with me to the front of the aircraft. We need to resolve this before we can depart. Captain, Emily said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. I'm requesting that you contact airport security and document this entire interaction. I believe this is a coordinated attempt to remove me from this flight based on racial profiling. Coordinated? Richard laughed harshly. Listen to yourself. You're creating a conspiracy theory because you got caught trying to fly on someone else's ticket. The accusations spread through the cabin like wildfire. Emily could hear passengers behind her discussing whether they should change flights. The elderly black woman in 3C stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is disgraceful! You should all be ashamed of yourselves." But her defense was drowned out by the growing chorus of concern from other passengers. Emily realized that public opinion was turning against her, fueled by assumptions and fear. Marcus pulled out his radio. "Ground control, this is Flight 2847. We're going to need airport security at the gate. We have a passenger situation that needs to be resolved before departure." Emily felt the weight of every stare, every whispered conversation, every assumption being made about her character and her presence on this aircraft. But beneath the humiliation, a cold understanding was crystallizing. This felt too coordinated, too practiced. Someone wanted her off this plane, and they were willing to destroy her reputation to make it happen. "These procedures seem to be applied very selectively," she said quietly, pulling out her phone to call her father. "But I wonder if they really know who they're dealing with." The cabin buzzed with tension as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Airport security boarded the aircraft within minutes, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from tense to electric. Officer Lisa Rodriguez approached cautiously, her hand resting on her radio. "We received a report of a passenger disturbance. Can someone explain what's happening here?" Marcus jumped in immediately. "Officer, we have a passenger who appears to be traveling on fraudulent documentation. She's been disruptive and refusing to cooperate with our verification procedures." Emily stepped forward calmly. "Officer Rodriguez, I'm being discriminated against based on my race and age. I've provided all required documentation, but they're demanding additional verification that they don't require from other passengers." Richard stood up, his 6-foot frame imposing in the narrow aisle. "Officer, I've been watching this entire situation unfold. This young woman has been increasingly aggressive and is now making wild accusations about racism. Frankly, I'm concerned about what else she might be hiding." "What exactly are you implying?" Emily asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm saying that people who scam their way onto flights often have other criminal intentions," Richard replied, his words carefully chosen to sound reasonable while being devastating. Officer Rodriguez looked between them, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Miss, I'm going to need to see your identification and boarding pass again." As Emily handed over her documents, she noticed other passengers beginning to film the interaction. Within moments, she realized videos were already being uploaded to social media. Her phone buzzed with notifications from her assistant, Sarah. "Emily, videos of you on plane going viral, people calling you a scammer, stock price dropping, need damage control now." The crowd dynamics were shifting rapidly. A businessman in 1B loudly announced, "I'm not comfortable flying with someone who might be using stolen identity." A woman across the aisle nodded vigorously, adding, "What if she's up to something worse?" But the elderly black woman from 3C, Doris Washington, stood up again. "Stop it, all of you. This child has done nothing wrong except exist while black in first class. Shame on every single one of you." Her words sparked a heated argument throughout the cabin. Passengers began choosing sides, with racial lines becoming increasingly obvious. Emily watched in growing horror as the situation spiraled completely out of control. Marcus got back on his radio. "Ground control, we're going to need FBI on scene. We have a potential identity theft situation, and the passenger is becoming increasingly belligerent." Emily's blood went cold. FBI? This had escalated far beyond anything she could have imagined. Richard smiled grimly. "Now you'll get the investigation you deserve, sweetheart." Within 20 minutes, FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez boarded the aircraft, her badge and stern demeanor immediately commanding everyone's attention. The entire passenger manifest was now delayed. creating a ripple effect of anger and frustration. "I understand we have reports of fraudulent travel documents," Agent Martinez said, her eyes scanning the cabin before settling on Emily. "That's correct," Marcus replied quickly. "This passenger has been unable to provide adequate verification of her identity or payment method." Agent Martinez turned to Emily. "Miss, I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft for questioning." "Agent Martinez," Emily said carefully, "I believe this is a coordinated attack on my reputation and my business. I'm the CEO of Dreamscape Technologies, and I have a meeting with investors tomorrow that someone clearly doesn't want me to attend." Richard burst out laughing. "CEO? You're 17 years old. Come on, Agent Martinez. She's clearly delusional on top of everything else." Agent Martinez's expression remained neutral, but Emily could see the skepticism in her eyes. "Miss, these are serious accusations you're making. Do you have any evidence of this alleged conspiracy?" Emily's phone buzzed again. Sarah's text was urgent. "Stock down 12%. Social media calling you a fraud." "TechCore Corporation spokesperson just gave statement questioning legitimacy of your company. They're destroying us." The mention of TechCore sent ice through Emily's veins. Her company's biggest competitor, the one they'd been beating in every market segment for the past 2 years. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. "Agent Martinez," Emily said quietly, "I need to make one phone call to my legal counsel. After that, I think you're going to find this situation very different from what it appears." Richard's confidence seemed to waver slightly, but he quickly recovered. More delays, more excuses. How long are we going to let this charade continue? The entire cabin erupted in frustrated agreement. Passengers were demanding to be let off the plane, threatening to never fly the airline again, and calling for Emily to be arrested immediately. Emily looked around at the chaos she'd supposedly created and made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and dialed her father's direct line. "Dad," she said quietly, "I need you to call Director Williams at the FBI and CEO Harrison at American Airlines. It's time to remind everyone exactly who they're dealing with." Jonathan Walker didn't waste time with questions. Emily's father was one of the country's most respected civil rights attorneys, and he had connections that reached into every level of government and law enforcement. Within 10 minutes of Emily's call, Agent Martinez's secure phone rang, not her regular cell phone, but her FBI communications device. Emily watched the agent's expression change from skeptical to confused to increasingly concerned as she listened to whoever was on the other end. The conversation was brief but clearly authoritative. "Yes, sir. I understand. I'll verify immediately through federal channels." Agent Martinez hung up and looked at Emily with completely new eyes. "Miss Walker, I just received a call from FBI Director Williams himself. He's personally requesting that I verify your identity through our highest-level federal databases immediately." The cabin, which had been buzzing with impatient conversation, fell into complete silence. Richard's confident expression flickered with the first real hint of uncertainty Emily had seen all day. Agent Martinez pulled out her secure federal tablet and began typing Emily's information into systems that required top-secret clearance to access. Emily watched her face change as the search results populated on her screen. The agent's eyes widened, then narrowed as she read through classified information that painted a very different picture than what she'd been told. "According to our federal databases," Agent Martinez said slowly, her voice carrying new respect and growing concern, "Emily Walker is indeed the CEO and founder of Dreamscape Technologies, valued at $2.3 billion. She holds top-secret security clearance due to her educational technology contracts with the Department of Defense and Department of Education. She's listed as a protected individual due to previous threats against her company." The silence in the cabin was now deafening. Emily could practically hear the gears turning in everyone's heads as they processed this information, the complete inversion of everything they'd assumed about her. Richard's face had gone completely pale. His hands, Emily noticed, were actually trembling slightly. That's impossible. She's just a kid. There has to be some mistake in your system. Agent Martinez's phone rang again, a different tone that indicated a priority call. She answered immediately. Martinez here. Her face grew increasingly serious as she listened. After a brief conversation, she hung up and looked directly at Captain Harrison. Captain, I have CEO William Harrison of American Airlines on emergency hold. He's requesting to speak with Miss Walker personally and immediately to apologize for this incident. Apparently, her father's law firm represents several major civil rights organizations, and this situation has already escalated to the highest levels of corporate and federal attention. Captain Harrison's face went ashen. The irony of sharing a last name with the airline CEO wasn't lost on anyone, and his own position was now clearly in jeopardy. He approached Emily with visible tension and barely concealed panic. Miss Walker, I had no idea. Please let me patch you through to CEO Harrison immediately. Emily accepted the captain's phone with the calm authority of someone who was used to receiving calls from CEOs, but she made sure her voice carried clearly through the silent cabin. Mr. Harrison, this is Emily Walker. The conversation was brief but heard by everyone in the dead silent cabin. CEO. Harrison's voice was loud enough and urgent enough for passengers to catch phrases like deeply sorry, immediate investigation, full accountability, personal assurance this will never happen again, and complete policy overhaul. When Emily handed the phone back, her voice was steady, but now carried an unmistakable authority that commanded instant respect. Agent Martinez, I'd like a full federal investigation into how this situation developed. I believe you'll find this wasn't random discrimination, but a coordinated corporate attack on my company and reputation, timed specifically to coincide with tomorrow's crucial investor meeting. Richard Blackwell was now visibly sweating. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. This has to be some kind of mistake. I mean, she's so young and she was dressed so casually and... So what, Mr. Blackwell? Emily asked quietly, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had just been validated by the highest levels of federal and corporate power. So casually? So black? So young? So female? Which combination of those factors made you so confident that I didn't deserve my seat, my respect, or my dignity? The businessman in 1B, who had earlier demanded Emily's removal, was now slumped in his seat, clearly wishing he could disappear completely. The woman who had agreed with him was staring at her hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes, her face red with shame. But Doris Washington from 3C stood up again, this time with tears streaming down her face. Emily Walker, honey, I am so proud of you. You handled this with more grace and strength than any of these fools deserved. You reminded me why I spent 40 years fighting these same battles. Emily smiled at the older woman, feeling a profound connection across generations of black women who had faced these same battles in different eras. Thank you, Mrs. Washington. Your support meant everything to me. You were the only person in this cabin who saw through the lies and stood up for what was right. Agent Martinez closed her tablet decisively, her professional demeanor now completely transformed. Miss Walker, I believe we need to have a very serious conversation about corporate espionage and coordinated attacks on your business. This appears to be far more complex than a simple airline dispute. We're looking at potential federal crimes. The atmosphere in the cabin had completely transformed. Where there had been suspicion and hostility, there was now a mixture of embarrassment, awe, and growing anger directed at those who had participated in Emily's humiliation. Marcus Brown approached Emily with visible shame. Miss Walker, I owe you a profound apology. My behavior was inexcusable. Emily looked at him steadily. Marcus, apologies are a start, but what matters now is ensuring this never happens to anyone else. The aftermath moved with corporate efficiency. Within an hour, American Airlines CEO William Harrison arrived at JFK personally, accompanied by the airline's head of human resources and legal counsel. Marcus Brown and Jennifer Williams were immediately suspended pending a full investigation. "Miss Walker," CEO Harrison said, his voice heavy with genuine remorse, "what happened here today represents everything our company stands against. We will be implementing immediate changes to our policies and training programs." But Emily's attention was focused on Agent Martinez, who had been making calls and gathering information while her corporate security team worked behind the scenes. "Agent Martinez, what have you found?" "Very interesting connections, Miss Walker," Agent Martinez said, her voice now carrying the authority of someone who had uncovered something significant. "Mr. Richard Blackwell here is indeed a senior consultant for TechCore Corporation. According to his employment records and travel history, this is actually his first time flying to San Francisco this year, despite his claims of being a regular passenger on this route. Richard's face was now completely drained of color. His earlier confidence evaporated like morning mist. That doesn't mean anything. I'm a legitimate passenger with a legitimate ticket." Agent Martinez smiled grimly, holding up her tablet. "Mr. Blackwell, we also found some very interesting communications on your phone during our preliminary investigation. Text messages from this morning coordinating with TechCore's PR department about a social media campaign to expose fraudulent competitors. There are specific references to Miss Walker, this flight number, and even the seat number." Emily felt a cold satisfaction settle over her as the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. So this was planned from the beginning. TechCore orchestrated this entire situation to damage my reputation right before my investor meeting. "It appears so," Agent Martinez confirmed, scrolling through additional evidence on her tablet. "We're also investigating whether Mr. Blackwell's first-class ticket was actually purchased by TechCore Corporation specifically to create this confrontation. The payment trail is illuminating." Richard tried one last desperate deflection, his voice cracking with panic. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove any of this was intentional. I'm just a passenger who wanted to sit in my assigned seat." Agent Martinez looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who had just discovered a smoking gun. "Mr. Blackwell, would you like me to read your text message from 6:47 a.m. this morning? The one where you wrote to TechCore's head of corporate strategy? Don't worry, by the time I'm done with her on that plane, no investor will touch Dreamscape Technologies. The little girl won't know what hit her." The collective gasp from the cabin passengers was audible. Even those who had supported Richard earlier were now staring at him with disgust and horror, realizing they had been manipulated into participating in corporate sabotage. Emily stood up, her full authority now undeniable, and her voice carrying the weight of vindication. "Mr. Blackwell, you made one critical error. You assumed that because I'm young and black, I wouldn't have the resources, connections, or intelligence to fight back. You underestimated me, and you underestimated the justice system that my father has spent his career defending." Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, the consequences were already cascading through the business world. TechCore's stock price was plummeting as news of the conspiracy broke on financial networks. Richard Blackwell would face federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations, effectively ending his career in tech permanently. American Airlines wasted no time in distancing themselves from the scandal. CEO William Harrison personally announced an immediate $10 million settlement with Emily, along with a complete overhaul of their anti-discrimination policies and mandatory bias training for all employees. Marcus Brown and Jennifer Williams, the flight attendants who had participated in Emily's humiliation, would not only lose their jobs but face civil rights violations that would follow them for the rest of their careers. Their actions had been recorded, documented, and would serve as evidence in both federal criminal proceedings and civil rights lawsuits. Justice, Emily said quietly, looking around at the transformed cabin, isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else again. As the FBI escorted Richard Blackwell off the aircraft in handcuffs, Emily finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had just occurred. She sat down in her rightful seat, 2A, and looked around at the other passengers, many of whom couldn't meet her eyes. The transformation in the cabin was palpable. Where there had been hostility and suspicion, there was now a mixture of shame, awe, and dawning understanding. "I want to say something to everyone here," Emily said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin, with the authority of someone who had just proven her worth under the most challenging circumstances. "What happened today wasn't just about me, and it wasn't just about one man's prejudice or one corporation's greed. It was about every person who has ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. Every young person told they don't belong. Every person of color made to feel like an intruder in spaces they have every right to occupy." Doris Washington nodded approvingly from her seat, while others shifted uncomfortably, finally understanding their role in the day's events and the broader patterns of discrimination they had unconsciously perpetuated. "But I also want you to understand something else that's perhaps even more important," Emily continued, her voice taking on the cadence of someone who had learned these lessons through lived experience. "Success isn't about proving yourself to people who are determined to diminish you. It's about staying true to your mission even when the world seems designed to make you fail. It's about building something so valuable, so undeniable, that prejudice becomes irrelevant." She looked directly at the passengers who had filmed her humiliation and posted it online, many of whom were now quietly deleting their social media posts. "Some of you recorded this incident and shared it on social media, thinking you were exposing a fraud or contributing to public safety. Instead, you helped expose the real fraud, a coordinated corporate attack designed to destroy a young black woman's business through manufactured scandal and social manipulation." Emily pulled out her phone and showed the screen to the cabin, displaying real-time stock prices and news feeds. "In the past 3 hours, Dreamscape Technologies' stock has actually risen 18%, not because of this controversy, but because the investors I'm meeting tomorrow called to express their outrage at this attack and their increased commitment to our mission. Turns out watching a 17-year-old CEO handle corporate espionage and discrimination with grace and intelligence is exactly the kind of leadership they want to invest in." A young father in row 4 raised his hand tentatively, his face showing genuine remorse and a desire to learn. "Miss Walker, I want to apologize. I was one of the people who assumed you didn't belong here, who believed the worst without any evidence. I want my daughter to grow up in a world where she's judged by her abilities and character, not her appearance or age. How do I make sure I never make this mistake again? How do I teach her better?" Emily's expression softened, recognizing the sincerity in his voice and the opportunity for genuine education. "You teach your daughter that greatness comes in all colors, all ages, all backgrounds, and all forms. You teach her to speak up when she sees injustice, even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular. You teach her to question her assumptions and look for evidence before making judgments. And most importantly, you teach her that her worth isn't determined by other people's limitations or biases." The cabin was completely quiet now, but it was a different kind of silence. Thoughtful, reflective, transformative. Several passengers were visibly emotional, confronting their own prejudices and the role they had played in perpetuating systemic discrimination. "Today reminded me why I built Dreamscape Technologies in the first place," Emily concluded, her voice carrying both conviction and hope. "Every child deserves access to quality education regardless of their zip code, their family's income, or the color of their skin. Because somewhere out there is another 14-year-old watching their siblings struggle in school, another 17-year-old with a billion-dollar idea, another young person who might change the world if we just give them the chance and the tools they need to succeed. As the plane finally prepared for takeoff, nearly 4 hours behind schedule but carrying a completely transformed group of passengers, Emily stood one last time to address her fellow travelers. The delay had cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it had provided something far more valuable, a real-time lesson in justice, courage, and the power of standing up for what's right. "I'm going to ask something of each of you," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just proven she could move mountains and change minds. Don't just walk away from this thinking it was an interesting story to tell at dinner parties or share on social media. This was a wake-up call, not just about discrimination, but about how easily we can all be manipulated into participating in someone else's agenda. She gestured toward Doris Washington, who had been her only ally in the beginning, the sole voice of reason in a cabin full of people ready to assume the worst. Mrs. Washington spoke up when it mattered most. She stood alone against overwhelming pressure and groupthink, against a cabin full of people who were ready to believe lies because they confirmed their existing biases. Be like Mrs. Washington. Be the person who speaks up when everyone else is silent, who thinks critically when everyone else is following the crowd. The elderly woman wiped away tears, her decades of fighting for civil rights vindicated by this young woman's triumph. She mouthed, "Thank you," to Emily, representing generations of activists who had paved the way for this moment. When you get home tonight, have real conversations with your families about bias, both the conscious kind and the unconscious kind that lives in all of us, Emily continued, her voice taking on an educational tone that reflected her background in developing learning platforms. Support businesses led by people who don't look like you, who come from different backgrounds, who might see the world differently than you do. Question your assumptions, especially the ones that feel most comfortable and natural. Challenge yourselves to see leadership and competence in forms you might not expect. Emily pulled out her phone one final time, displaying a press release that had just gone live. I'm proud to announce that Dreamscape Technologies has just launched the Dignity in Flight Foundation. We'll provide full college scholarships to students who demonstrate both academic excellence and moral courage. Young people who stand up for justice even when it's difficult or unpopular. Mrs. Washington, would you consider joining our board of directors? Your voice and experience would be invaluable in selecting recipients who embody the kind of courage you showed today. The cabin erupted in the first genuine, unified applause of the day. Even passengers who had opposed Emily earlier found themselves clapping, caught up in the transformation of the moment and perhaps seeing a path toward redemption for their own actions. Here's what I want you to remember as you go back to your lives, Emily said as the applause died down, her voice carrying the weight of lived experience and hard-won wisdom. Today, you witnessed something that happens to people of color, young people, women, and other marginalized groups every single day in America. The only difference is that today, you also witnessed what happens when someone has the resources, support system, and preparation to fight back effectively. Not everyone is that fortunate, and that's exactly why we all have a responsibility to be better. She sat down and buckled her seatbelt as the plane began to taxi toward the runway, the city lights of New York twinkling below them like stars. "Oh, and one more thing," Emily called out with the first hint of mischief she'd shown all day, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "To everyone who filmed this incident thinking you were exposing a fraud or protecting public safety, thank you. Your videos are now part of a federal investigation that's going to result in real systemic change in how airlines handle discrimination complaints. Sometimes the best way to fight darkness is to make sure everyone can see it clearly, and your documentation helped ensure that justice could be served." As the plane lifted off toward San Francisco, Emily closed her eyes and thought about the investor meeting that awaited her. They'd wanted to see her leadership in action, to understand how she handled pressure and adversity. Well, they were about to get exactly that, and more than they could have ever imagined. The next time you see a young person, a person of color, or anyone who doesn't fit your expectations of what success looks like, she whispered to herself as the plane climbed into the night sky, remember that you might be looking at someone who will change the world, but only if you give them the chance to fly.